You see that guy right there? The guy with no health running away from a horde of fuelings and one hit away from death? Well, that guy is actually me. Now I bet you're wondering how I got myself into this situation. It all started when I decided to make a new challenge for myself in a little video game called Valheim. Now I love Valheim, but once you play through it a few times, it can start to feel a bit stale. So for my next adventure, I wanted to do something spicy and really challenge myself. And after some theory crafting, I came up with something. Welcome to the once my armor degrades I can't use it challenge. The one item one use challenge. Okay, real talk, I actually still haven't figured out a title for this video, but I'm hoping I figure something out by the end of the script. Anyways, the rules for this challenge are pretty straightforward. Rule number 1. Once I craft an item and its durability is used up, aka it breaks, I can no longer use that particular item, whether it's armor, a weapon, and yes, even the hammer that you used to build things with. Rule number 2. Once I craft something, I am not allowed to upgrade it past level 1. Rule number 3. Crafting arrows is not allowed, but if I find them in chests scattered around the world, then I can use them. Rule number 4. No using fists to defeat enemies, so basically no unarmed attacks. Rule number 5. No taming animals such as wolves or locks to help me out in battle. And to make things even harder for myself, when I die, whatever is in my inventory will be gone forever. Meaning that if I die with my hammer that's used to build things, then I can no longer use it. I decided to add this one because normally dying in this game has absolutely zero consequences. And honestly, I kind of just like making things much harder for myself than they need to be. The goal of this challenge is to defeat all the bosses. And that's it. Hope you all enjoy the video. And if you have any creative or unique challenges that you would like to see me try in Valheim, or any game for that matter, then please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your ideas. And with that being said, let's move on to the video. I start this new adventure by creating a character by the name of Spicy Elixir, and I start a new seed on a world called Varrock. Now yes, I could look up a speedrunning seed with all the bosses close together and get this video out really quickly, but exploration is what I enjoy most about Valheim, and I believe it's a core part of the game. As the Valkyrie drops me off, I am once again greeted by my good friend Hugin, who I immediately punch in the face because I have no time at all to listen to his tidings as there is a lot of work to be done. And before you say it, no, I am not counting this unarmed attack as breaking the rules because me and my boy Hugin have a mutual understanding between us. And yeah, sometimes our relationship can get a bit toxic, but we still love each other at the end of the day. Anyways, you guys know the drill at this point. I start off by picking some berries and various materials needed to build myself a workbench and a hammer. And of course, taking some time to enjoy the view of this simple but beautiful game. After some sightseeing and mild exploration, I build myself the hammer, which I will have to use very sparingly throughout this challenge, as well as the club as my first weapon, which I will try to milk for as long as humanly possible, since it's a really good blunt weapon that I can use for the skeletons in the burial chambers that I will be exploring in just a bit. I then build myself a workbench in an abandoned house close to the Eikthyr boss spawn and set out to hunt down some deer for the 2 trophies required to spawn him. I also take out a boar who's been hounding me for the past 5 minutes now for some boar meat and leather scraps, which I will need to build myself my first bow and my next weapon, the flint spear. Once my club eventually breaks, of course. It's always good to be prepared in case I die and lose my weapons, because without the resources for future weapons and no way to obtain them, I will be unable to progress and be forced to reset the run. Luckily for me, the first deer I find drops me my first trophy, as well as some hide used to craft various items and deer meat which I will be using for the fight against Eikthyr. I had just 1 trophy to go, and after a short while of chasing down some deer, I managed to obtain it. After that, I took down a couple greylings for some resin that I needed to build my first shield and went back to my crafting bench to make it. Once that was done, I built myself a campfire and a cooking station and began cooking up all the food that I had accumulated in preparations for the fight. I then decided to wait until morning to summon Eikthyr, because normally I'd build myself a bed and set it as my spawn point, but I didn't want to waste my precious hammer on it, so I opted to wait out the night in my little shack. Once the sun came up, I made my way over to the Eikthyr boss spawn and I summoned him. I still had my torch on me that I started the game with, and I used that as a weapon for a decent chunk of his health. Once it broke, I switched over to the club and used that for the rest of the battle. Honestly, for this fight, there's really not much to say. Eikthyr is the tutorial boss, so he really wasn't much of a challenge, but I needed the hard antler he dropped for when I got to the mountains. And yes, you heard that correctly, the mountains. Not for copper, or tin ore, and not the swamps, But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I will explain why it's important for the mountain biome later on. Once Eikthyr was defeated, I picked up the antler he dropped and the trophy and went to the spawn to hang it up and activate my buff. After I had activated my buff, I was finally ready to play the game and begin my adventure. I kicked Hugin a few times as he tried whispering sweet nothings into my ear and set off to explore this new world and locate the next boss and the protector of the forest, the Elder. So far, the run was going great, even though what you're watching is technically my 4th attempt at this challenge. The hardest part of this challenge so far has been not clicking that repair button, since that is just so engraved into my head. And now that the tutorial part was done, it was time for me to put on my tryhard panties and get serious. Because unlike Eikthyr, I couldn't just rush into the fight against the Elder without a little bit of prep. Armor would be nice, but due to the nature of this challenge, I decided to hold off on making some. Making some bronze armor would just be too risky and time consuming, since I had plans for my pickaxe and using the trolls might just get me killed. As for the troll hide armor, I wanted to save that for Bonemass. So it looks like I was going to be fighting the protector of the forest absolutely naked. And being naked means that I was very vulnerable. I'll get into my plans for him in a bit, but basically the plan was just to not mess up and die. And besides that, I was just going to wing it. I mean, sure, the Elder can seem scary, especially when compared to the tutorial boss we just defeated, but underneath his tough exterior, he's just a big old softie. Before I started the journey, I stopped by the workbench I built and crafted myself the flint spear, flint knife, and the stone axe for the road, since I didn't know how long it would take before I found a new place to settle down and I didn't have the luxury of making too many pit stops due to the limited uses of my hammer. After making my weapons, I then cooked up the rest of my food and headed off to find the nearest Black Forest biome. Almost immediately upon entering the Black Forest, I stumbled upon a troll and thought, I should take the opportunity to get some resources from him smashing the trees and rocks around me. But after like 30 seconds, I realized that I was in way over my head, and one shot from him could kill me and immediately end the run, since I had everything on me and dying would render all my weapons and more importantly, the hammer useless. Not to mention the fact that the food I had was not enough to tank a single hit from him. So I ran off and I continued the search for the Elder. While in the Black Forest, I kept my eye out for burial chambers as they contain vital resources I would need to collect for this challenge. Burial chambers have an abundance of gold and trinkets I could use once I find the trader, as well as arrows and of course the very valuable Surtling cores. I would of course have to be very careful since they could contain some high-level skeletons inside that could easily blindside me and end the run, since once again, I have all my weapons and of course the hammer on me, that if I die with will lock me out of making any more progress and force a restart. During my travels, I came across another scary troll minding his own business next to some tin deposits and stupidly attempted to use them to obtain a few ores. I did manage to get a couple, but then I got myself the hell out of there. During the night, I noticed a familiar glow in the distance and ran towards it. It was a Grey Dwarf spawner which would drop me the ancient seeds needed to summon the next boss, the Elder. I tried to take it down quickly, but it spawned way too enemies for me to handle, including the Grey Dwarf brutes, who, with my current health and stamina situation, hit like a truck. So, once again, I turned around and ran out of there. I was in a pretty poor situation at this point. I was cold, wet, it's dark out, and I have a mob of enemies on my ass. But as I run away, I notice something very beautiful. A safe haven, if you will. I notice the trader. An amazing discovery so early in the game. Not only does the trader have a bunch of goodies for me to buy later on, but he has a sort of shield around him that the enemies cannot enter. So I run towards his campground and wait for the dangerous night to be over. This is the run, I excitedly whispered to myself as I ran towards him. Once it was morning, I set off once again looking for a potential base location and the Elder spawn. I entered a few burial chambers along the way, but didn't accomplish much except losing my current best weapon, the club, as it degraded in a 1v1 against a skeleton, as well as getting hit to just one hit point away from death while trying to safe spot some more skeletons using my next available weapon, the spear, which was honestly terrible against them and almost ended my run prematurely. Continuing forward, I discovered a quaint little abandoned village with a maypole in the center, which I considered settling down at. The maypole is a rare spawn which gives a +1 comfort bonus if you rest near it. But as much as I wanted to do that, I ultimately decided against it since my building would be limited to only the necessities, because once my hammer broke I would no longer be able to build anything, so I had to choose my base location very wisely. The ideal location would be close to a few different biomes, boss spawns, and resource areas for easier travel later on. Moving forward, I found another Grey Dwarf spawner and managed to take this one out, giving me my first ancient seed needed to summon the Elder. Only 2 more left to find. My next discovery was by far the most dangerous one. I found a huge Draugr village which contained some very dangerous enemies which could easily take me out in a single blow. Now I wasn't suicidal, so I marked it down on my map to revisit later and continued on. After not too long, I finally found a runestone containing the whereabouts of the Elder spawn. I quickly activated it while being hunted down by a platoon of Grey Dwarves and ran to safety to check out the location. It wasn't far. Now I just needed to figure out where to settle down and prepare for the fight. The Elder is pretty scary if you're unprepared, and there was a lot that I would need to do before summoning him. The Elder is what I consider the first real challenge of this run. You see, the fight itself is more of an endurance test than anything. The only thing I really needed for this fight is some half-decent food for stamina and health, a bow, and a lot of arrows. The only problem is that I can't craft myself any arrows, so I will have to explore a bunch of burial chambers and collect around 200 or so arrows. The other issue I had is that I will have to take him on with only a level 1 bow since I cannot upgrade my weapons, and a level 1 bow might break mid-fight due to the low durability it has. So the plan I had for this fight is to scavenge a bunch of arrows and bring the Finewood bow and a crude bow as backup in case the first one breaks. And of course, I have to play very carefully to not get hit by any of his attacks. So on my way towards the spawn, I kept my eye out for any and all burial chambers, marking the ones that were too difficult to explore and exploring the ones that weren't infested with too many skeletons, and collecting as much loot as my inventory would allow me to carry. It was around this time that I ran into a bit of a predicament. On my way to the Elder, I ran across a giant landmass of the plains that blocked me off. There was no way to get there on foot because the plains, for those who don't know, is one of the most dangerous biomes in the game, filled with the most evil of enemies, the dreaded Deathsquitos. These Deathsquitos were capable of doing such massive damage that even the Black Forest trolls would be afraid of. The only thing I could do was sail past it. So with my inventory completely full, I figured it was time to use up my precious hammer and build myself a temporary base to store my supplies and build a boat. Luckily, there was an abandoned village nearby and I decided to take it for myself. I built some storage containers for my loot, and as I set down my bed, Hugin stops by to check out the crypt. I saw the look of disgust in his eye, and before I could explain myself, he vanished as fast as he arrived. I quickly brushed it off and ran back to the Black Forest to prepare for my voyage out to sea. Now, I won't bore you with every single detail of my crafting, farming for Surtling cores, ancient seeds, arrows, copper, tin, and etc. because I kind of got into the zone and explored pretty much every square inch of the giant Black Forest biome near my base, which took me quite a few hours to do. I mainly used the trolls to do my farming for me by standing still, staring straight into the face of certain death as I rolled out of my way for every attack, and taking my sweet ass time in the dark and cold burial chambers, kiting the undead hordes around and closing the doors in their faces. So after around 5 or so hours, I had my bows crafted and 214 flint arrows that I needed to fight the Elder, as well as the bronze buckler and mace for emergency use. After triple checking every detail to make sure I didn't forget something, I built my ship and finally set sail. The trip was very short and pleasant, and I even discovered a neighboring swamp biome across the sea that I can sail to after I defeat the Elder. Everything was falling into place very nicely. Once I arrive at the Black Forest biome, I dock my boat and run quickly to the Elder. It was time, and I was ready. I sit down by the eternal bonfire for my rest bonus and summon the Elder. Now the Elder is easy if you're prepared, but he's very tough if you're not. Let me elaborate. You see, the Elder is a tank and hits very hard if you're not geared up properly, which I am not, considering the fact that the only piece of armor I'm wearing is a loincloth. He has 3 attacks. The first one is where he shoots multiple vines in your direction, which are easily avoided if you stand behind the 4 pillars. The second attack is when he summons roots out of the ground near you, which you can avoid by running away, and his third attack is when he stomps the ground if you get too close to him, which I won't have to worry about as long as I have enough arrows to finish him off from a distance. The fight itself can last a very long time, especially with low tier weapons and ammunition, which is what I'm currently working with. So that's what I mean when I say the fight is an endurance test, because I cannot mess up and get hit, as one single mistake could easily kill me and I would be forced to craft melee weapons for the second attempt. Because again, if I die, everything I have on my person will be unusable and I won't be able to craft again. The fight was going fairly well for around 3/4 of his health, and then things took a turn for the worse. You see, I carelessly took a vine to the face, which took a significant chunk of my health away. And as I ran to a different pillar to take a second to heal up, I noticed a platoon of Grey Dwarfs coming in to back up their forest god. I feel overwhelmed with enemies and panic run to what I think is safety, but take another vine to the face, taking my health down to just 12 hit points. Anything and everything can kill me now, including the pebbles that the baby greylings pelt you with. This was looking bad, and thinking quickly, I run to a stone structure close by that I discovered on the run here that I marked on the map as a safe haven. I build a campfire in the only place I can and sit next to it to get my rest bonus back and to regain my composure. While I was healing, I noticed my Finewood bow is on the brink of degrading and mentally prepared myself for the mid-fight switch. Once I healed up back to full, I run outside and take out my bronze mace and buckler to make quick work of the Grey Dwarfs surrounding me. With the immediate threat neutralized, I make my way back up to the Elder, who's healed up a decent amount to finish the fight. With my nerves calm, the rest of the fight goes off without a hitch, and I defeat the Forest God and pick up the trophy he drops along with the very important key to the swamps. Let me start this chapter off by saying that me and Bonemass, we don't get along all too well. He is the one boss in this game that has given me more trouble than anyone else, so I had to prepare, and I had to prepare well. What I decided on bringing to the fight was an iron mace and an iron shield. The mace was a must because Bonemass is weak to blunt damage, and to be frank with you, he isn't even that weak to it. It's honestly the only thing that will even do half decent damage to him because he's just that tanky. I would also be bringing along a stag breaker for AoE damage against the mobs that he spawns in frequently, or the iron sledge if I can obtain the items required to craft it, because the sledge is just a way better version of the stag breaker. But it can be very difficult to craft as it requires a very rare trophy from Draugr elites and a metric ton of iron. The armor I'll be bringing to this fight is the Trollhide armor, as I just can't afford to fight Bonemass in a loincloth like I did with Eikthyr and the Elder. Doing this fight naked is a guaranteed death sentence, and I need to save the iron armor for the mountain biome exploration. I will also be running around a lot during the fight, and you can run much faster with the Trollhide armor compared to all the other armor in the game. The second most important thing I need is some potions. Specifically the health potion and stamina potion for emergency uses, and of course the poison resistance potion, since every attack Bonemass does will poison me. But the most important piece of the puzzle is not the armor, not the weapons, not even the potions. No. The most important thing that I need for him was the food. And food can get a bit tricky because there is food that gives you a lot of health or a lot of stamina. So what I needed to do was come up with the best 3 food combo to bring into this fight. And what I decided on was turnip stew, serpent stew, and cooked serpent meat. This combination will give me a total of 192 health and 153 stamina to work with. And that, along with my potions, should be just enough to balance out the bad armor I'll have. Now the turnip stew shouldn't be too difficult to obtain as long as I can find some turnip seeds. But the serpent stew and serpent meat could prove to be a bit tricky since my crude bow is close to degrading and finding the serpent can be a nightmare. Oh, and spoiler alert, it was. Before I set my plan in motion, there was one thing I had to do, and that was to pay a visit to my good friend Haldor the Merchant, who I discovered early on in my adventure. There was one very crucial important item that I needed from him before I went to explore the swamp biomes, and that was the good old Megging Yord, which increased my carrying capacity by 150. This was a very useful item for exploring the crypts as it would greatly help me transport the iron ores from the crypts back to my base. Luckily I had plenty of gold and valuables stored up from the many hours I spent exploring the burial chambers. So I set sail back to my base for a quick pit stop to gather all my gold and jewelry before heading off to the swamps. Along the way I ran into a serpent who spawned right near my base. I took a few shots at him with my bow, but because I got close to land he swam away and despawned. Unfortunate, but not a big deal as I had a lot of time left before I was ready to fight Bonemass. I docked at my base, collected all my valuables, and headed to my boy Haldor. When I arrived, I traded him all my gems and whatnot in exchange for some gold, which I then used to buy a Megging Yord. And because I had some left over, I decided to buy a fishing rod and some bait to catch fish, which was another decent source of food. As well as 5 Ymir flesh, which was one of the 4 ingredients needed to craft the iron sledge. I ran back to base and deposited everything except for the mason shield, the swamp key, food, and of course the Megging Yord to maximize the amount of iron I could carry, and then I set sail. On my way to the swamp, the serpent spawned yet again as I cursed under my breath, realizing that I forgot to bring my bow and arrow and I couldn't take him out. So I continued on and sailed around the outskirts of the swamp looking for a safe space to dock. Docking in the swamp biome is very risky since there are leeches in the water who can really damage and potentially even destroy my boat, and I didn't want to have to use up my hammer to repair or build a new one. So I sailed until I found a black forest biome to dock at and marked it on the map. This seemed like a fairly large swamp biome, which was very good as there was a very good chance it would contain the Bonemass spawn as well as a bunch of crypts for me to explore. Now I was taking a massive risk venturing into the swamp in nothing but a loincloth, weak food, and no poison resist potions, so I would have to be very careful and pick and choose my fights wisely. My main concerns were leeches and blobs, who could combo me out with a strong attack and then take the rest of my health down with poison damage. And of course, Draugr archers who can snipe me from a long distance. This was a very high risk area and I needed to be aware of my surroundings at all times as well as my health. There was also a new enemy since my last playthrough called the Abomination, who I didn't know much about, and I was greeted by him almost immediately. I decided not to mess with it and just ran away searching for my first crypt. As I was running around, I saw one in the distance and entered it immediately. Now, Odin was obviously watching over me because, let me tell you something, never in all of my life of playing Valheim have I ever run into a crypt that was this stacked. As I entered, I noticed that there was a runestone that gave the location of Bonemass. I quickly made sure that there was no enemies around me and opened my first chest. The chest had 20 iron inside. I then clicked on the runestone to see where the spawn for Bonemass was, and would you look at that? Not too far away. But that's not even where the good luck ended. I opened up the second chest and bam, 13 more iron. I then opened the third chest and wouldn't you know it, bam, 23 more iron ores. That's right, the first crypt contained not only the Bonemass spawn, but 56 iron ores all in the first room. I was in disbelief. I basically had everything I needed for the fight. All that was left to find were the 10 withered bones needed to summon him. I was honestly worried most about this stage of the game, but it proved to be super easy. Barely an inconvenience. I ran back to the boat to deposit the ores and ran back looking for more crypts for withered bones and to get as much iron ores as I could. While in the swamps, I took every single opportunity I had to collect resources from enemies such as blood bags from leeches and entrails from draugrs for crafting various things later on. Again, I won't show every single detail because this took a huge chunk of my time, but let me say it was no walk in the park. Because I had no armor, I ran into a lot of close calls and danced with death more than I thought I would. One crypt in particular, I got hit by a draugr archer that took me down to 3 health. I also got sideswiped by an abomination who seemingly came out of nowhere while I was waddling through the murky swamp water. After exploring the swamp, which turned out to be much smaller than I thought it would, I decided to go back to my base and start smelting the iron. I ended up looting a total of 79 iron ores, and I found 5 withered bones out of the 10 I needed to summon Bonemass. I made it back safe and sound and began the very long smelting process. And while that was going, I took the time to do some peaceful fishing and reflect on my travels thus far. I then built myself some workbench and forge upgrades to allow me to craft more items. Once all the ores were done processing, I decided it was time to go on a serpent hunt and look for a new swamp biome. So I grabbed my bow and arrows and I set sail. Now this is where my luck ran out and made me really wish that I killed that serpent that I saw on my way to the first swamp. I sailed for around 5 or 6 hours, discovering new biomes while fighting against the most annoying wind ever, and I didn't see a single serpent. I docked the boat near an empty Mistlands biome bordering the swamplands where Bonemass was located and took a look at my map. I sighed in disbelief because I really needed the serpent meat for my fight with Bonemass. It was the core part of my strategy, but at this point I was starting to think I needed to come up with an alternative food source because I was really starting to lose hope. Also at this point my ship was in dire need of repairs because the storms were damaging it so much. I hopped off the boat and figured I might as well scope out the spot where I'll be fighting Bonemass, and along the way I found some turnip seeds needed to cook up some of that tasty turnip stew. I now had 1 out of the 3 food I needed for the fight. I just needed to kill 1 serpent and I would be set. And to make things even worse, the Bonemass summoning altar was in the most awkward place ever to get to. I of course had to cross the plains to get there, albeit a small chunk, but still that was very risky since I never know when a fueling or death skeeto will pop up and kill me. Now, a smart man would turn back and, I don't know, make some damn armor or something before attempting this, but I am not a smart man. So I decided to push through and prayed that Odin protected me. And of course, at like the worst possible time imaginable, while I was swimming through the water, a death skeeto pops up from behind and surprises me by doing 82 damage in a single bite. 1 more bite and I was dead. And outrunning a death skeeto is impossible, so I had to stand my ground and hit it at the perfect time. If I didn't, everything I had on me would be lost, including the hammer, which means the run is dead. That's it, I thought to myself. The run is dead because I didn't deposit my hammer in the safety of the boat. God, what is wrong with me? Luckily though, I managed to time the attack perfectly and take the little asshole out. I ran through the whole swamp and explored every single inch of it, managing to collect 23 more iron ore in the process. And I gotta say, the spawn for Bonemass was pretty chill. The annoying part was that getting there is a real pain in the ass. Manageable, sure, but still a pain. So anyways, after exploring the world for the better part of my day, I decided to sail back and start prepping for the fight, and hopefully running into a serpent on the way back. And spoiler alert, I didn't. I arrived back at my base feeling a bit frustrated that I didn't find a serpent, but I deposited all the iron ores and crafted myself a cultivator to plant the turnip seeds close by. It wouldn't be long until they finished growing, but I did have some time to kill. So begrudgingly, I went back out to sea to look for the serpent because I was dead set on killing him. I was experiencing gambler's fallacy at this point, thinking that since I already spent so much time hunting, I was due a win. And after many moons go by, he finally showed his face. I set the wheel of the ship in one direction to circle around and proceeded to shoot my bow and arrow. And after a very intense battle in the stormy sea, I finally take him out and collect the meat I was after for so long. I arrive home and I go to harvest my turnips, but I notice a neck standing by and only 3 turnips left. Little asshole must have destroyed them while I was out hunting, so I kill it and assess the situation. I decide, since turnip seeds are very annoying to find, that I would have to replant them for more seeds and wall them off. This wasn't that big a deal, but it did mean that I had more time to kill. Next up, I built myself an iron cooking station for higher tier meats, and I cooked up the serpent meat. That's now 2 out of the 3 food I needed, and only 1 more to go. I then built myself a cauldron where I would be crafting my potions, as well as the turnip and serpent stew, and many, many more endgame food recipes. And since I was right next to the plains biome, I ran there real quick, after of course depositing everything I had in case I died, to collect some cloudberries which I needed for some stamina potions. It was here that I had a thought occur. I've been way too lucky so far. I should have died at least 20 times over by now, but somehow I managed to survive. I realized that I was getting too complacent and not taking the necessary precautions to ensure my survival and the success of this challenge. It was here that I made the decision that I wanted to craft myself the iron sledge for the Bonemass fight. Now yes, it is an expensive item to make, costing 10 ancient bark, 30 whole iron, 4 Ymir flesh, and the incredibly tough to get Draugr Elite trophy, but I felt like it was worth the time investment. Bonemass makes me nervous, and the iron sledge is really useful against the mobs he spawns. So I crafted myself a bronze sword because my mace was about to give out, and I set sail to a new swamp for the remaining withered bones I needed, and of course to kill some Draugr Elites. I arrive at a nice and safe meadows biome next to the new swamp, dock my boat, and run towards the unexplored swampy lands. Again, I won't bore you with the details of every little thing that happened, but I will say that I almost died twice. The first time I almost died, I barely managed to dodge a hit while getting comboed out by 2 Draugrs outside of a crypt. And the second time was inside of a crypt to, you guessed it, another Draugr. If I mistimed that roll, it would have been lights out for this Viking. Boy, was I really pushing my luck. I honestly don't know how I'm still alive at this point. Besides that, nothing really interesting happened. I explored all the crypts, gathered all the iron, and found the remaining withered bones that I needed to spawn Bonemass. And sadly, didn't find a single Draugr Elite to take down, but I still had a plan for that. I sailed back home, harvested my turnips, deposited the withered bones and the iron, and I started running to a quaint little village that I discovered a long time ago. Let me explain. If you recall, I discovered a Draugr village in a meadows biome a while back on my journey to find a base. Now, these villages are special because there are always a few Draugr spawns in them. Now, the best part about this village is that it's in a nice and safe meadows biome where I don't have to constantly be looking out over my shoulder and can safely and carefully kill them one by one as they spawn. This is where I would farm out the Draugr Elite trophy needed for the iron sledge. So I deposited my hammer and headed that way. Once I arrived, I got a reality check real quick, because although the meadows are safe, the Draugrs are still very dangerous. I literally died almost 2 seconds after arriving when I charged them head on in their little shack. I always seem to forget that I'm super vulnerable with no armor. So I put my tryhard panties on and get to work on luring them out and killing them one at a time. I took out a ton of Draugrs during the next hour or two, and I even had a 2-star Draugr Elite spawn on me who I was hesitant to fight due to his tankiness and the fact that he hits like a truck. But I did manage to get him in the end while fighting extra cautiously. And just as my bronze sword was about to give out on me, I killed the last elite on the trip and got the trophy. The trip was a success. I now had all the crafting materials needed for the weapons and all the ingredients for the food. It was time to make everything and fight Bonemass. The second I arrived home, I crafted myself the iron mace, the iron sledge, and a new iron shield. Next, I built a fermenter for fermenting the stamina, health, and poison resistance potions, did some more farming, and I made a bronze axe to hunt down some trolls for troll hide armor while I waited for the potions to be ready. I did have a near-death experience against one of them due to fighting him on some weird terrain, but all was good because I made it out alive in the end. I crafted myself the troll hide armor, which honestly felt great because after running around in nothing but a loincloth the entire game, it felt like I turned on easy mode. I then harvested my carrots and turnips needed to build a spice rack, which was an upgrade for my cauldron that unlocked me more recipes, and finally made my turnip and serpent stew. It was time. I set up my inventory and set sail. After what felt like an eternity of preparation, I was ready. Thankfully, I didn't make it too far before remembering that I forgot to grab the most important item. The withered bones. So I Tokyo drifted a sharp U-turn, sailed back, grabbed them, and headed back out. After a nice and relaxing journey out on the open seas, I arrived at the empty and safe Mistlands biome, docked my boat, and ran nervously towards the boss. Now, remember how I mentioned that getting there was a pain in the ass? Well, on my way there, I encountered a Death Skeeto who took a chunk of my health, a 2-star skeleton who actually helped me out and fought the Death Skeeto for me, a herd of locks, and I almost got sniped by a 1-star spear-throwing fueling hiding in the trees, which nearly gave me a heart attack. God, I was so ready to move on from the swamps at this point. Eventually, I did arrive at the Bonemass spawn, went into a nearby crypt, ate the food, built a campfire for a resting bonus, and mentally prepared myself for the fight. After a minute or so of resting and getting my health and resting bonus to full, I came out and I summoned Bonemass. I fought him carefully and cautiously, timing my rolls to avoid his melee attacks. I also ignored his poison attacks thanks to the poison resistance potions, and I timed my health and stamina potion usage strategically, since there's a fairly long cooldown after using one. There were a few weird glitches that I noticed during the fight, like when he threw out his range attacks that spawns enemies. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but when the attacks came out, the enemies didn't spawn. But hey, I wasn't complaining. The less mobs, the more I can focus on taking down this toxic slime ball. I did take a few hits from him throughout the fight, but the real danger came out when he was almost defeated. It looks like my fight with the Swamp God seemed to attract a curious Draugr archer, whose sniping abilities were some of the best I've ever seen. I mean, seriously, it's like this guy was the Valheim version of Legolas, and I thought he would be the one to end my run rather than Bonemass himself. My health was low, but so was Bonemass, and he was protecting the archer while simultaneously allowing him to shoot through his huge, gelatinous body. My best option was to finish this as fast as possible and take out the archer after, so that's exactly what I did. I ran towards the behemoth and just barely finished him off with 31 remaining hit points. The second he was down, I attacked the archer and eliminated the remaining threat. Whew, I did it, and I felt like I could finally breathe for just a moment. I clenched my fist in celebration and picked up the trophy, which gave me a very useful defense buff that I would be using from now on, as well as the wishbone that I will be using to find silver on my second favorite biome, the mountain biome. Okay, so let's talk about motor for a second. Okay, so let's talk about Modder. The good news is that the preparations for this fight shouldn't be near as long or difficult compared to Bonemass. I already had great food for the boss fight and mountain exploration, a decent weapon, and a great shield. All I needed to do was find the 3 dragon eggs needed to spawn her, 1 or 2 silver veins, and to kill some good boys to make the wolf armor. The bad news is that the mountain biome has a lot of dangerous creatures roaming around. Now, the wolves do pose a threat in a 1v1, but as long as I am careful and don't panic, they should be manageable. The real danger when it comes to good boys is when they travel in packs. Their attacks already do a massive amount of damage, and if I'm caught without stamina against even 2 wolves at the same time, I'm as good as dead. The other massive issue I have is with the drakes. You see, I can't melee them, and my crude bow only has a handful of shots left before it degrades. So really I had just 2 options. Try to avoid them, which is unrealistic and will almost certainly end in me dying because there's just way too many of them. Or I can craft the Draugr fang bow and try to rush through this biome very quickly before it degrades. After arriving at my base, which I guess I should call an outpost from now on because I can't really call this dinky hut a base, the first thing I did was craft myself the antler, the bronze, and iron pickaxes. Now I know that only the iron pickaxe can be used to mine the silver veins, but trust me, there's a method to my madness which I will explain in a bit. I made myself some sausages, muck shakes, and deer stew for the upcoming mountain expedition, grabbed my Bonemass trophy, and ran to hang it on the altar for the defense buff I'll be using. Along the way I stopped at Haldor's gift shop and bought a few things. The main thing being a Yule hat in celebration of kicking Bonemass's ass, and I resumed the trip. I swapped to the new buff and ran back to pick up the frost resistance mead that I put in the fermenter before I left, and I was now ready to journey to the new biome close by. After a short bit of exploration, I came across my first drake, which I immediately took out, and this is when I discovered a new danger the mountain biome had in store for me: the steep terrain. Yes, you heard me right. While trying to pick up the spoils from the Drake kill, I had a near-death experience, the closest I've ever had so far. I slipped and fell a few feet while scaling down the steep cliff, getting me to literally 1 health point. A small gust of wind would have been enough to take me out at that point, and with all 3 pickaxes on me, that would have ended my run. Thank God that there was no immediate threat around and I could regain my composure. A few minutes later, after healing back up to full, I locate my first silver vein next to an abandoned stone structure which could come in handy, as I could hide inside from any enemies that may sneak up on me while I'm mining. Now this is the part where the 3 pickaxes come into play. Let me explain why. Silver veins are buried underground, and once my pickaxe breaks, then that's it. I am locked out of obtaining any more silver. So my plan was to completely dig up the silver vein using the antler and bronze pickaxes to minimize the usage of the iron pickaxe. So I started mining away, and to my surprise, I uncovered 2 silver veins in one spot, which I've actually never seen before. This couldn't have been more perfect. Now when it comes to silver veins, there's actually a fun little trick that some of you may not know about. And instead of explaining it, let me just show you. Yeah, Super satisfying, trust me, I know. Anyways, now began the back and forth trips of transporting the silver ores back to base, which I believe took only 3 or 4 total trips. And luckily this mountain biome was really close by to my base, so it didn't take that long. I was now the proud owner of 74 silver ores, and I began the long and boring process of smelting them down. I had one more material to collect before I was able to craft the Draugr Fang bow, and that was Guck, which are those green orbs on the trees in the swamp. So I begrudgingly made my way back to the swamps. Now I only needed 10 Guck to craft the bow, and I was very stingy with my hammer uses since I felt like I was running pretty low. So I decided to look for the trees that had Guck at the very bottom so that I didn't have to build to reach it. It took me around 6 or 7 days of sailing to different swamps that I had previously discovered for me to find the 10 Guck I needed for the bow. Was it worth it to save a few hammer uses? I mean, probably not, but I did it anyways and I didn't die, so all's well that ends well, I guess. The second I arrived home, I grabbed the materials and built that bad boy right away. And what a beauty she was. I now had the best in slot bow, which has a passive poison effect no matter what arrows I use with it, and will be a great addition to the fight against Modder. Now I just had to find her. My next priority was obtaining the wolf cape for the passive frost resistance it gave, and for that I needed a wolf trophy. My iron mace was about to give out on me, so I thought I'd try out a new weapon that I've never used before. So, I crafted myself an ancient bark spear for some good boy hunting, while I looked for some dragon eggs in the boss spawn location and headed out. While I was out massacring some good boys, I noticed that the spear was kind of garbage and had really short range for its attacks. So I would have to be more cautious when fighting and have my fingers on the potion button and the Bonemass buff. On the other hand, the Draugr Fang was fantastic at taking out the drakes, and it was really hard not to use it all the time. Very quickly I found the first dragon egg, which I stole from the unsuspecting drakes nearby. And I also managed to somehow obtain 2 drake trophies almost back to back, which are dumb rare and used to make the drake helmet, which I wasn't planning on making. But hey, I ain't complaining. I went home and I crafted the wolf cape immediately, which would be a big help since I now didn't need to make any more frost resistance potions. I then built a butcher table for better food recipes, cooked up some wolf meat which I now had plenty of, and made myself some ice cream which gave a ton of stamina. I explored both mountain biomes on my island, but they were a bit small and didn't have anything else notable, so I set sail to another island nearby and stared in awe of a really huge mountain in the distance. This mountain biome was absolutely massive compared to the 2 tiny ones that I was previously on. The terrain on this one was much more treacherous and the mobs seemed much more dangerous. I found the second dragon egg fairly quickly, but the sun was setting and with my inventory completely full, I began my descent. I was definitely cutting it close with the sunset. The mountain at night is far more dangerous with 2-star wolves spawning, so I had to get out of there quickly. I had a very scary encounter with 2 wolves guarding the base of the mountain and came very close to dying. Luckily though, one of them got distracted and ran off, allowing me to neutralize the one that was chasing me. With my armor broken, supplies low, and the mountain fully explored without finding the Modder spawn, I went to the shore and saw another giant mountain in the distance. It was time to resupply, gear up, and set sail once again. But before I ventured on, I needed a new set of armor. So I ran back to the area where I found the 2 silver veins and finished off the other one, which gave me an extra 84 silver ores to play around with, which was the perfect amount for the remainder of this challenge. After a long time passed, the ores were refined and I crafted myself the first real set of armor, the wolf armor, complete with the drake helmet. When I arrived at the new mountain biome, I was a bit frustrated to see that it was surrounded by the plains and swamps, so there was no safe place to dock at. I decided to dock at the plains because I felt like the leeches were a bigger threat to my boat compared to the mobs in the plains. It might have been the wrong decision though, because the second I stepped off the boat, I was greeted by an unfriendly local who wasn't a fan of travelers. But, empowered with my new shiny armor, I taught him a swift lesson not to mess with me and began my climb up one of the biggest mountains I've ever seen. After a very long and grueling climb to the top in the middle of a cold snowstorm, I came across a Draugr outpost. As I was clearing out the Draugrs, I saw a runestone in their base that they'd been cursed to protect, and after finishing off the last Draugr, I read the runestone and found where Modder would be summoned. It turns out she was hiding just a short, brisk walk away from my base the entire time. I honestly didn't know what to feel. Excited that the mother of all dragons was so close by, or annoyed that I wasted so much time looking for her in all the wrong areas. I mean, it was probably a bit of both. I don't really remember since I recorded this footage over 6 months ago, but whatever I felt didn't matter because this was progress. After my discovery, I immediately sailed back to my base and decided to check out the area as well as to find the final dragon egg. I also noticed that my ancient spear was just about to break on me and crafted myself a bronze spear to deal with the mobs. Yeah, it was a downgrade, but I just needed something to deal with the mobs and I felt comfortable enough with my armor and shield to keep me safe. I then walked by the perimeter of the plains biome that blocked me off from entering the mountains, looking for a spot with the shortest sprint towards the boss. And although I did run into some fuelings, I did manage to find a good enough spot. On the way there, I found the 3rd and final dragon egg needed to spawn Modder. I picked it up and continued on. When I arrived, I placed down the first egg and began to survey the landscape around me. To be honest, it was not the best, but I'll have to work with what I got, I thought to myself. I also managed to find another dragon egg just a few feet away, which is pretty great because now I didn't have to do 2 separate trips up the mountain. I ran back and began to prepare for the fight. Now, I underestimated the amount of drakes I'd encounter, and my Draugr Fang was on its last legs, but it should still be able to help out a bit during the fight. What I needed was to craft a good melee weapon to do most of the heavy lifting for me, and I ultimately decided on the silver sword. Yes, it was a hefty investment in terms of silver, but this was the mother of all dragons we're talking about. Anything less would have been an insult to her. Once the sword was made, I grabbed my food, the last egg, my pickaxe, hammer, and I headed out. This time I decided to sail to the Black Forest biome near the Elder for a safer route compared to running through the plains. Once I arrived at the summoning altar, I dug out a little safety pit for myself in case of an emergency, placed down my campfire for a rest bonus, and waited for my current food to expire so that I could eat the high tier food for the boss fight. I then placed the third and final dragon egg on the altar and summoned the mother of all dragons. She spawned in the air, so I began to shoot her with my bow, which I quickly found out did little to no damage. Most likely because it was still a level 1 bow and I was using some very low tier arrows with it. It looks like my main source of damage would have to come from the silver sword when she lands to do her ground attacks. Unfortunately for me, as I mentioned before, the land around me was very awkward and uneven, so I had some trouble getting in a good position to swing my blade. And after some awkward maneuvering around, I figured it out and began to swing. There's really not much I can say for this fight, to be quite honest with you. Madr has pretty telegraphed attacks when she's in the air, and she only attacks like once every 30 seconds when she's on the ground. My biggest struggle was dealing with the terrain because she kept landing in the most awkward spots imaginable. Around the time when she had about 30% health left, I had 2 wolves spawn and rush to protect her. And if I wasn't wearing some good armor, I would have surely died when I was hit by Madr's attack and then bitten by the wolves. Thankfully though, I had that pit for emergency scenarios such as this, and I ran inside to heal up and regain my rest bonus. Other than that, the fight went pretty smoothly overall. I kept peppering her with arrows when she was in the air, and I waited till she landed to do my main source of damage. I took her down, picked up her tears and trophy, and I was now ready for the plains. Ah, the plains. A beautiful, sunny biome filled with some of the most dangerous mobs in the game, and a cool boss that goes by the name of Yagluth. My plan for Yagluth was fairly simple. Just don't die. Okay, let me expand on that a bit. Yagluth is basically another endurance test more than a boss fight. Sure, his attacks may do a lot of damage, but they are pretty telegraphed, and as long as I don't make any mistakes, I should be just fine. My main concern is that he has a ton of health and the fight can drag on for quite a while, so the chances to make mistakes present themselves more frequently. He only has 3 attack styles, a melee attack where he slams his fist on the ground, and 2 range attacks. The first one being where he summons meteors that rain from the sky, and the second one being a laser breath attack from his mouth. His attacks also do fire damage, so I'll definitely need a few fire resistance potions ready to go. And as for the food combo, I decided on a lox pie, blood pudding, and a serpent stew, which gave me a total of 203 health and 175 stamina. At this point in the game, my armor was due for an upgrade, so I wanted to upgrade my wolf armor to the padded armor. And as for the weapon, I decided to save the best for last and build myself the Frostner, which I already had all the materials for. With Madr defeated and the plains biome right next to me, I decided to immediately check it out and see what I'm working with, especially because it was on the way to my base. My main priority was to find some flax to make linen for the padded armor, the 5 totems to summon Yagluth, and of course to locate his spawn location. To say that what happened next is amazing would be an understatement. You see, the first thing that I saw before I even stepped foot into the plains was none other than the Yagluth spawn. Yep, that's right. I didn't have to spend hours sailing, looking for, and exploring a ton of different plains biomes. No, everything I needed was right here in front of me. Well, I mean other than the totems, so maybe I am getting ahead of myself and I'll need to explore more plains after all. But regardless of that, this was an amazing discovery. I can't believe the seed had the Elder, Madr, and Yagluth all so close to each other. Reinvigorated by this discovery, I continued to explore this plains biome and found an unfamiliar new enemy to me called the Growth. A bouncy blob of some sort that called a giant tar pit its home. I didn't really know how they worked mechanic-wise, but after being near their tar pits and seeing a half-dead fueling running away, I quickly realized they were very dangerous and not to be taken lightly. But at the same time, I also thought, how can I take advantage of this? I didn't have much time to think of something as I was attacked out of nowhere by what I believed to be the Growth while I tangoed with a 1-star fueling and a death skeeto. This attack slowed me down, which was not good, so I popped a health potion and my Bonemass buff just in time and got the hell out of there. Yeah, there's no way I'm messing with them right now. I then stumbled upon a chest with some barley inside that I needed to make some fire resistance potions for Yagluth. But before going any further, I walked over to my base to clear up my inventory, which was full at this point, and to build myself an artesian table with the dragon tears I received from Mater. And after a bit of running and figuring out where to put it, I placed it down. The artesian table doesn't do anything on its own, but it unlocks blast furnaces, spinning wheels, windmills, and stone ovens built within 40 meters of it. I then crafted some iron nails, which unlocked a whole bunch of new things, a spinning wheel, and the windmill, which I loaded up with the barley I picked up. It was now time to check out the fueling villages that I discovered and marked down on the map a few minutes ago. Forgetting to bank my hammer like an idiot, I headed out. As I arrived, I hopped up on a boulder to see if I could maybe spot a totem or two, and thought of the best way to go about this. I thought that maybe luring them out one by one would be the safest way to go about it, and gave it a try by alerting someone with a bow. Their berserker noticed and rushed towards me. I kited him around for a bit to get a feel of his attack style and pattern, but decided that this would take way too long, is pretty risky, and ultimately decided on a more bold approach that has worked for me in the past pretty well, which was just to bum rush and pillage their villages quickly while they chase you down the entire time. Now, I know it may sound like a dumb idea, but my highest round in Call of Duty Zombies was 57 on Kino der Toten, so you could say that I was a bit of a professional at something like this. So, that's exactly what I did. Unfortunately, this village didn't have any totems, but I did manage to pick up some flax which I needed to make the padded armor, so I guess this attempt was somewhat of a success. Now, I also learned something very helpful while I was running away. As I was running from the angry mob, trying to get the fuelings to de-aggro, I ran by the tar pits containing the growth creatures. I noticed that they didn't have a good relationship with the fuelings, as they completely ignored me and attacked each other. I watched their battle closely and came up with a great plan. You know the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? I can round up the fuelings from their villages and lead them over to the tar pits. And, after they kill each other, I can loot the spoils and then explore their villages safely. This was unironically a fantastic discovery. Now, I needed some locksmith, so I found a lox roaming around nearby and led him to the tar pits to see how he would fare against them. And it was a slaughterfest. The growth absolutely melted the lox. Exactly how powerful were these new creatures? I definitely needed to be careful around them. I picked up the locksmith and got out of there quickly. I was now running low on food and potions, so I again went back to my base to grab more potions, harvest the onions I planted a while ago, and I grabbed myself some wolf meat and made me some wolf skewers. I then built myself a stone oven which I would later use to make loxmeat pies. I then cooked up some loxmeat and went back to check out the next fueling encampment. This next encampment was much bigger than the first and was located right next to some tar pits, but unfortunately there was no growth creatures around for me to exploit this time. I guess they must have lost the war seeing as they were so close to each other. So I used my Call of Duty zombie skills to run around the encampment collecting a whole bunch of barley and flax, and more importantly, finding my first totem piece. That's 1 out of 5 and only 4 more to go. Once I was done here, I ran over to the third and final fueling stronghold this biome had to offer. Unfortunately, this one didn't have any totems, so after running around and collecting all the flax and barley, I decided to move on. I did get very careless here by putting myself in bad positions and almost died multiple times. You see, while the stronghold was small in size, the fuelings were strong in numbers and very smart too. While I was running away, I noticed that they teamed up with the local lox roaming around, and one of the shamans even gave it a protection shield barrier. Seeing that definitely put the fear of God in me, but thankfully I got out of there just in time. I mean, if it wasn't for the Bonemass buff and the potions, I would have for sure died. I ran back to base to regain some composure and figured, while I'm here, let me finish doing everything that I still need to do in terms of upgrades so that I don't have to worry about it anymore. So I built myself a black furnace for the black metal refinement, added more barley to the windmill, and added the flax to the spinning wheel, which honestly I did mess up on when picking a place to build it. It needed a roof, so I had to use my dwindling hammer uses to build a mini hut for it. I then went to sleep to quicken up the refinement process, woke up, and collected everything, which unlocked the padded armor and a bunch of other stuff. Now, I did have some issues getting my forge to level 4 because everything was just so packed together, which meant that I unfortunately had to waste quite a few hammer uses to rearrange some stuff around to make it all fit. But in the end, I did manage to place the final upgrade down for it and unlock the newest tier of weaponry, the black metal weapons, which I desperately needed really badly right now since my bronze spear has outlived its usefulness and the silver sword that I've been using is just one swing away from breaking. And since I was so close to finishing this challenge, I decided not to risk it on trying out a new weapon and just went with the old reliable black metal sword that I was very familiar with. And for the final upgrade I was going to build, I built myself the pots and pans, which was an upgrade to the cauldron that unlocked the blood pudding and lox pie that I would be using in the final fight against Yagluth. I cooked up some new food, some fish wraps and blood pudding, which were very simple to make, put on my shiny new black metal sword, and went back to the plains biome near my base. I ran to the last and final fueling village in this plains biome and slowly snuck up to see what I was working with. Right away, I noticed a totem, so I popped my Bonemass buff and ran inside. I didn't need much else from the fuelings, so I gathered them all up and ran to a tar pit close by. There was just something so satisfying about watching the little green goblin boys get absolutely melted down by the ferocious and mysterious blobs of living tar. So I sat far off in the distance and watched the show. And once the entire village was wiped out, I grabbed the loot and ran off into the sunset. With this plains biome fully explored and only 2 totems to show for it, I headed home and prepared to sail to a brand new plains biome. But not before leading a couple of poor, unsuspecting locks to their death via the tar pits from hell. Although they did put up a good fight, and one of them actually came out on top, battered and bruised, but victorious. I then proceeded to end his suffering and collect the meat. That locks will be remembered though. I ran to my boat, ready for a new plains biome, and luckily for me, I had plenty of options to choose from, all relatively close by. And after just a short 2 minutes of sailing, I arrived and continued my search for the totems. While exploring, I had a random event of some not so good boys trying to hunt me down. And because it was dark and very foggy, I ran right into an enemy fueling village. Being in a state of panic, I stupidly ran inside, just hoping that the wolves would help me out. And luckily, they did. I mean, they didn't put up much of a fight, but it was good enough for me to find my 3rd totem and get the hell out of there. What could have gone really bad actually worked out very well, which seems to be the running theme for this playthrough. I guess those wolves were good boys all along. Now, I needed to find a safe place to weather out the foggy night, so when I stumbled upon a stone structure, I ran inside, and to my surprise, I discovered the 4th totem just sitting there ripe for the taking, guarded by only a single fueling. I grabbed it and swiftly took him out. I now just needed 1 more totem, and I was ready to fight Yagluth. The next morning, I set off and found a new village, right next to the tar pits of hell, which you know damn well I was going to take advantage of. I set down a campfire to regain my rest energy, and once I got close, I could see it, the final totem, and it was right there, ripe for the taking. I grabbed the attention of the fuelings and led them to the tar pits. I did want to watch them fight each other, but there was only one thing on my mind at that point, and that was fighting Yagluth. I grabbed the totem and turned around just to see the growth being killed off right before my very eyes. It looks like I pulled off a smart move for once in my life, and after that I sailed back home immediately. I was now basically ready to fight Yagluth. I just needed to make a few more things. The fire resistance potion, the lox pie, the padded armor, and of course, Frostner. So the first thing I did was make some fire resistance mead and threw that bad boy in the fermenter. And to my dismay, I found out that I actually needed iron instead of black metal for the padded armor, which at this point I was completely out of. So I was forced to go back to the swamp biome again. It was annoying, but not a big deal since I had to wait for the potions to ferment anyways, and with my wolf armor, health, and stamina potions, the swamp biome posed no danger at all. So I did some mining and exploration of some crypts until I had enough iron for the padded armor. I sailed back home, crafted the armor, and collected my potions. Now at this point I could tell Yagluth knew his time was almost at an end, because he sent his skeleton army after me in a last-ditch attempt to silence me before I summoned him. I mean, this was just embarrassing at this point. He actually missed his one chance to finish me off because like 15 seconds before they attacked, I was AFK. Like literally, I was in the bathroom. The skeletons could have easily killed me and ended the run since I had everything on me at that point. What a wasted opportunity. I of course cleared them out quickly and decided it was time. No more Mr. Nice Viking. After clearing them out, I made some bread and baked the last piece of food for the fight. The oh so delicious lox pie. I then grabbed all the materials needed to craft Frostner and made it. I finally had everything I needed to take him down. Now, because I was stingy with my hammer uses and was nearing the end of this challenge, I decided to build some decorations in my hut for a longer resting bonus, which would definitely come in handy due to the long drawn out battle that was soon to come. I built some rugs from the hides of the various animals I've slain throughout my adventure in this world and some tables and whatnot. And all the added decorations gave me a resting bonus of 10, which meant that I now had 17 minutes of better health and stamina regeneration while rested. I then decided to build a portal connecting my home and the Yagluth spawn to start the fight right away after getting my precious rest bonus. This resting bonus was very valuable and I didn't want to waste a second of it. So I ran towards Yagluth in the dead of night, found a nice little rock overlooking the battlefield and placed the connecting portal there. I then ran inside and went to sleep knowing that tomorrow will be my final day in this world, regardless of what happens in the fight. I wake up to a beautiful morning, fully rested, and jump into the magical portal. I then run to the summoning altar, set up the 5 totems, and I summon the Skeleton King. Before he even finishes fully spawning in, I begin wailing at him relentlessly, taking any advantage I could get. The Frostner is doing very good damage, and I take a sizable chunk of his health before he even gets a single swing in. Enraged for my lack of honor, he summons down meteors from the sky, hitting me and setting me ablaze. Unlucky for him, I had popped a fire resistance potion for that and take very little damage. He looks at me, and I look at him, and our battle continues full force. He gets some good licks in, and so do I. Back and forth we go. He goes all out and really takes a few massive chunks of my health down every now and then, forcing me to utilize my health and stamina potions. I have to be careful here. One wrong move and it could end very badly for me. I popped the Bonemass buff early on to get a bit more familiar with his attack pattern, but even with the buff in my potions, he still does a ton of damage. I'm forced to utilize the stone structures to hide from his attacks while waiting for my health and stamina to recover. And then, something terrible happens. The fight is intense, but almost over. Yagluth has around 25%-ish health remaining, but he gets me down to just 20 health too. So I hide behind the pillars, waiting to heal back up just a little bit more before finishing him off. When out of nowhere comes the most deadly thing in all of the plains, the growth. This demonic blob of tar jump scares me out of nowhere with his range attack and gives me a slow debuff. I had to act fast and think of something. I've never actually killed one of these things before, but leaving it alive has disaster written all over it. Luckily, it must have just wandered over from a fight because it was very low health, so I knew I could handle it. I waited for just the right opportunity and charged at it, taking it out in one blow. With the threat neutralized, I could focus back on Yagluth, but I needed to end this quickly before any more unwanted guests showed up, especially now that my Bonemass buff was gone. And after a little bit more of some back and forth between us, I dealt the finishing blow. And with my Frostner and shield almost completely broken, the victory couldn't have come at a more perfect time. I picked up the Yagluth head and the Yagluth thing, and ran back to the portal with a smile on my face. I then picked up the Elder and Martyr heads at my base and ran back to the altars, back to where it all began. I then hung up all the heads on the altars and decided to pay my best friend Hugin one last visit before I ended this challenge. So, I swam out to sea, finally dying in the process, and respawning back at my home with my best bud waiting for me.